This is a short but scarring story nonetheless from my early childhood. I grew up in an average middle-class home in the suburbs. My sister and I were huge fans of Christmas as kids. I had to be like 7 years old when this happened because we had just moved to our new house. This is one of my earliest memories in life that I remember vividly just because of the gravity of it. On Christmas Eve, I would always have trouble sleeping, even as a young kid, just due to anticipation. I would stay up really late playing video games in my room on my old box TV. I'd play until I just fell asleep from exhaustion. This night in question, I was playing a Star Wars game for the PS1, and when I had to go to the bathroom, I turned the volume down low and quietly snuck out of my room because I knew my mom would get mad if she heard me sneaking around on Christmas Eve night. I snuck to the upstairs bathroom, and when I was done, I was quietly going back to my room when I heard the sound of the tree rustling around downstairs. My first instinct was to think, Santa. I started tiptoeing down the stairs until I got to the bottom. The sound of the rustling pine needles was louder now. I peeked around the bottom wall of the stairway into the living room. There were no lights on except for someone holding a flashlight. I could see only the person's legs as they were bent over behind the tree. There was a black bag on the floor, and this random adult man came out from behind the tree and looked at me. He looked at me and put his pointer finger up to his mouth, and he made a shushing motion with his lips. He whispered, "Yes, I'm Santa." I was old enough and smart enough to know that wasn't what the Santa I grew up knowing looked like. I started screaming for my mom and dad as loud as I could. I remember the man started freaking out, deciding whether or not to take the bag he filled with our gifts, and he ended up running away to the front door. I don't remember if he had to unlock it or if it was already unlocked or not. I just remember him leaving through the front door, and seconds later, my parents running down the stairs. I'm sure I screamed, "There was a man in here," and them seeing the black bag on the floor filled with what would have been stolen gifts proved that. Here's where my memory started getting fuzzy, so I had to ask my parents what happened next. My dad told me he went outside in his slippers and ran all over the place, ready to kill someone. Half the ornaments on the tree were taken off and in the bag. What kind of sick, evil person steals people's sentimental Christmas ornaments? According to my dad, the method in which the man broke in was the back door, which it appeared he yanked open with a crowbar due to the chipped wood. A house a few blocks away had also fallen victim to this, and it was on the news. It was most definitely the same guy. I don't remember much from when I was 7, but this is a memory that still sticks in my brain like it was only a few years ago. A few years ago, we hosted Christmas at our house. It was my wife and me, and we were having about 10 to 15 family members come over. We have a somewhat large house and also a large backyard. Our house was decorated and ready for the guests. On Christmas Day, everything started out very well. Family started to arrive at roughly 11 o'clock in the morning. I was pretty busy talking to people and stuff, but maybe at about 11:30, something odd happened. One of my cousins arrived, and I went outside to greet him. As he was walking in, he told me that he thought he saw a guy in my backyard and wanted to know if I knew about him. I was confused. Nobody was going outside, and I didn't know why anybody would be in the backyard. I asked him to tell me more about it. He said that when he pulled into my driveway, he noticed a guy walking near the tree line of the woods in the backyard. He thought that it was me at first, but quickly realized that it wasn't. He took a few steps towards the backyard after getting out of his car, but the man quickly went out of sight. We both decided to go over there and look. After walking back to where he spotted the guy, We saw the footprints in the snow but didn't see anyone. He must have been gone by then. We yelled out into the woods, asking if anybody was there. It was complete silence. I really had no idea who it could be. My neighborhood is pretty quiet, and the houses are spaced out pretty good, but I didn't know what else could be done, so we both just went back inside. After going back in, I quickly forgot all about it and was busy talking to people for hours. Everything was going well, but then as I was walking past one of the windows that looks out to the backyard, I saw the man myself. He was kind of far away, but I saw a guy walking through the edge of the tree line. This had to be the same person. I yelled for my cousin to come and see. The man in the woods then stopped and seemed to look in my direction. My cousin was walking over, but by the time he got there, the man then darted back into the woods. My cousin saw him for just a split second. He told me that it was the same guy that he had seen earlier, though. We kept watching the area, but he did not come back. I still wasn't really sure what to do about it, so we just went back to where everyone else was. I looked out the window a couple more times but didn't see the guy. I hoped that maybe he would leave for good. I still couldn't help but wonder what he was doing back there, though. Eventually, people left, and it was soon just my wife and me. We looked out the window several more times that night, but there was still nothing. At that point, I felt a lot better about it. The very next morning, I went outside in the backyard. Everything was fine at first, but I soon noticed something strange. The man wasn't back, but there was a new set of footprints in the snow. It was clearly from a person, and it wasn't mine. There had been a fresh layer of snow on Christmas Eve, and my cousin and I walked back there to the woods the day before. We were far away. In fact, I saw those sets of tracks. These new tracks went from the woods right to our back door, then they appeared to go back to the woods. Could the same man have walked to our back door and tried to get in overnight? It creeped me out to think about it. For the next several days, I was very suspicious, but after that, I never saw the guy. I also didn't notice any other strange things happening. I still don't know who the man was and what he was doing. On the evening of December 6, 1959, Dr. Law arrived home after a long day of work. Law was one of the most successful surgeons in the greater Los Angeles area and had even conducted speaking tours of various Ivy League universities. He was an exceptionally hard-working man, and this hard work had paid off in the form of an opulent Spanish colonial-style home in the neighborhood of Los Feliz. Law's wife Mary was hard at work decorating their home for the holidays, while their three children, 18-year-old Liam, 11-year-old Debbie, and 13-year-old Joseph, busied themselves with some homework before dinner. After a dinner so wholesome it could have been on the cover of a Christmas card, the children returned to their bedrooms to carry on their schoolwork while Mary retired to the master bedroom to read. Law also opted for the comfort of a good book and poured himself a drink before settling down in front of the fireplace to thumb through his copy of Dante's Divine Comedy. There he remained for the next few hours, long after his wife and children had gone to sleep. Yet instead of steadily progressing from chapter to chapter, Law was focused on one particular passage of the Divine Comedy. It was a line from Canto 1, which read, "Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost." It's not exactly clear why the line resonated with Law so much, but as he retired to bed, he couldn't seem to shake the passage from his mind. For the next few hours, Law lay in bed, trapped somewhere between dreams and consciousness. Finally, after 4 in the morning, Law quietly climbed out of bed, crept downstairs, then walked into the family kitchen. Careful to remain as quiet as possible, he retrieved a large, well-used ball-peen hammer from a toolbox that he kept under the sink, then walked back upstairs and back into his bedroom. There he silently stood over his sleeping wife, hammer tight in his grip, possibly contemplating the enormity of his intentions for a few moments before finally deciding to strike. When he did, Law raised the hammer high into the air, then ended Mary's life with a single blow. At least, it's commonly believed that Mary died instantly because she certainly didn't make enough noise to wake up her 3 sleeping children. Even so, to ensure that she was dead, Law began to smash his wife's skull to pieces, inflicting blow after devastating blow with the flat steel of his hammer. After murdering his wife, Law crept into his eldest daughter's room, intending to execute her in the exact same manner. Yet although she appeared to be asleep, Liam had been awakened by the sound of her father opening the door and was watching him from the corner of one eye as he quietly approached her bedside and raised the hammer. As Law attempted to execute her, Liam was able to raise an arm, deflecting the initial blow and potentially saving her life. Then, as her father attempted to finish her off, she began to scream so loud that it not only roused her siblings from their slumber but also woke the neighbors on both sides of the Perelson house. To silence her, Law struck his eldest daughter several times about the head and face, but it was too late. He could already hear the sound of his youngest daughter emerging from her bedroom, seeking the source of the disturbance. Law intercepted 11-year-old Debbie before she could enter her sister's room, then guided her back to bed under the pretense that she simply had a nightmare. He'd assumed that he'd beaten Liam unconscious and that he'd be able to simply creep back in and finish her off once he dealt with young Debbie. However, reassuring his younger daughter had taken much longer than he had initially anticipated, and after walking back into Liam's room, Law found it completely empty. Liam had escaped out of an open window, carefully sliding down a section of roof before jumping to the hard concrete below. Despite a nasty sprain, adrenaline propelled Liam to the door of a horrified neighbor who was quick to respond after having already heard her screams. This neighbor then alerted emergency services, and before long, the streets of Los Feliz were awash with the red and blue lights of ambulances and police cruisers. 11-year-old Debbie had not been fooled by her father's explanations, and while he stormed about the house trying to locate her older sister, Debbie had gathered up her brother before the pair of them fled the property. Having realized his home was quickly being surrounded by police and that his children had all managed to escape, Law prepared to defend himself with deadly force. As the teams of EMTs rushed the children to a nearby hospital, the cops closed in on their home and forced their way inside. They carefully advanced from room to room, calling out to Law, terrified he was waiting to ambush them from some unseen vantage point. After gaining access to the family bedroom, the police officers found Law lying on the floor of his ensuite bathroom, having ingested a fatal dose of prescription drugs. The crime scene alone told a grisly story of inexplicable and violent madness, yet the most important question remained unanswered. Why in the world had Law done something so utterly horrifying? During the initial phase of the investigation, the police questioned the Perelson neighbors but were told that the family were close-knit, loving, and showed no visible signs of discord. However, following a search of Liam's car, they found a letter which read, "We are on the merry-go-round again, same problems, same worries, only tenfold. My parents are in a bind financially." The letter also mentioned how Liam intended to find a part-time job in order to help contribute to the family finances. Investigators began to theorize that Law had simply snapped under the pressure of their dire financial situation and had decided that taking his loved ones' lives was preferable to the misery of poverty and uncertainty. Yet the fact remained that Law neglected to leave any kind of note, and with Liam stating that her father made no attempt to explain his actions, his motivations were likely to remain a chilling mystery. The only clue Law ever gave was leaving his copy of the Divine Comedy open with that same line highlighted, "Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost." Once they were well enough, the three Perelson children were reunited, then sent out east to live with relatives. They have since dropped off the radar, and it's commonly believed they've changed their names to avoid any association with their father's crimes. Many years later, once the media firestorm had died down, the mansion was sold off at auction, with the proceeds going to settle the estate's debts and the remainder going to the children. Initially, the auctioneers were extremely skeptical that the home would sell, as they were legally obliged to inform potential buyers of the home's history. Yet to their surprise, one couple seemed very interested in purchasing the home. Julian and Emily Enriquez didn't seem in the least bit disturbed by the mansion's dark past, and their single solitary bid secured the home at an extremely reasonable price. Yet instead of making the mansion their permanent residence, the new owners only visited the home on rare occasions. Neighbors said Julian and Emily would show up in the dead of night before carrying large trunks or pieces of furniture inside. They would never sleep there and appeared to use it for nothing but storage. But some in the neighborhood began to theorize the couple's nightly activities were much more sinister. After all, why would they be so interested in purchasing a home so many believed to be haunted? When Julian and Emily Enriquez passed away in 1994, ownership of the mansion passed to their son Rudy. Neighbors had long since grown sick of how the mansion's rotting carcass dragged down nearby property values and hoped that Rudy would quickly renovate and sell the place. Yet after a few months, it appeared that Rudy was doing exactly the same thing as his parents, showing up in the dead of night, then dragging a variety of unusual-looking items up the driveway and into the house. Rudy also appeared to have enlisted the aid of a variety of unsavory-looking people, although what exactly he needed their help with remained a mystery. One neighbor claimed that after questioning a group of shady-looking visitors to the home, the group claimed that they were ghost hunters and camped in the mansion's backyard for several days while they conducted a series of paranormal surveys. The presence of the ghost hunters briefly reignited the media firestorm surrounding the Law murders, and Rudy Enriquez was forced to publicly deny that he believed the house was haunted. Yet he certainly seemed okay with granting access to those that did, which in turn was judged as being in very poor taste. To keep the old mansion rotting and abandoned was one thing, but to use it to profit from a horrifying murder was beyond the pale. The move forced Rudy to admit the opposite was true and that it was him paying for ghost hunter services, although frustratingly he refused to elaborate further. The presence of ghost hunters and the subsequent media interest seemed to solidify the home's reputation as being haunted by the spirits of Law and Mary. It became known as the Los Feliz Murder Mansion, a tourist attraction for the more macabre-minded visitors to LA. Many famous paranormal investigators have also visited the murder mansion, with some boasting of discoveries and evidence either real or imagined, often in the form of hearing voices and whispers while roaming the outside of the house. One such investigator told the press that he felt the presence of extreme energy inside the home and that a number of so-called orbs had been photographed in the mansion's upstairs bedrooms. To the skeptics among us, the presence of so-called orbs is explained by a heavy amount of dust or other such debris in the air. Naturally, being such an old derelict home, the Los Feliz mansion would have been a veritable dust trap. But there's just one problem with this explanation. In order for orbs to appear, dust needs to be thick in the air, and the only two things that can stir it up in such a way are strong exterior winds causing drafts or the physical presence of something inside the house. The paranormal investigators have claimed that they photographed the exterior of the house before they ever entered and that orbs appeared in these photographs, meaning that either strong winds had stirred up dust in the home that day or that someone or something had been moving around in the house shortly before their arrival. Whether you believe in such phenomenon or not, the reports certainly make for chilling listening, but it still seems redundant considering the abject horror of the original crime. Dr. Law's reasons for wanting to murder his wife and children remain a complete and utter mystery. It's easy to blame the family's financial problems, but such self-destructive behavior seems completely out of character for a man who so dearly cherished his hard-won success. As cryptic as it may be, I believe the best clue to Harold's mindset lies in his choice of literature during his final few hours. Dante's Divine Comedy tells the story of a single dead soul which travels through hell and purgatory before eventually reaching heaven. The soul witnesses God's divine rewards for just souls, but they also witness the horrific punishments meted out to the hordes of mortal sinners who find themselves condemned to hell. Some have suggested that Dr. Law was seeking reassurance for his actions, reasoning if it was a sin to murder them if the goal was to save them from a life of misery. But there are others who report that the passage from Canto 1, the one which seemed to hold Harold captive, was in reference to his own sanity. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward path had been lost. Harold hadn't lost his way in life. What he mourned that night was the loss of his mind. This happened on Christmas Eve just last year. I'm 22 and recently graduated from college. Each year on Christmas Eve, my family goes to my uncle's house for a get-together. Then, on Christmas, everybody comes to our house. Last year, unfortunately for me, I had to work on Christmas Eve. I had a job at a department store in a nearby city to where we live. It was a part-time job that I worked mostly in the summer or whenever I was back home from school. I would be getting paid extra, but I would have to miss the family gathering at my uncle's. We closed slightly early at about 8 p.m. instead of the usual 10 p.m. My uncle's place was almost an hour away, though, so even if I wanted to drive there right after work, it would be kind of late, and I decided not to. Instead, I went back to my parents' house, where I lived and was all by myself. I got back home after work at about 8:30. I remember not long after I returned home, I texted with my parents, and they were probably going to be staying at my uncle's until almost midnight. I made some food, then relaxed and went into the living room and put on a movie. Everything was going well until about 11 o'clock at night. Out of nowhere, there were some loud bangs on the front door. It was very startling. I sat up and didn't even want to look to see who was there. The noises continued. It was like whoever was there was pounding as hard as they possibly could on the front door. After probably 10 seconds, I walked over to a window that overlooked the front door. I was upstairs and on the second floor. When I got to the window, I very carefully looked outside. I peeled back the window cover ever so slightly. When I did, I saw 3 large-looking men wearing dark-colored jackets and dark hats. I couldn't see any of their faces. They were standing around the door, and one of them was knocking on it. The bad feeling that I had became much worse. I had no idea what to do. I ran out of the room and called my parents. I told them about the situation, and my parents did not know who the men could possibly be. They said to call the police if the men didn't leave and told me that they would leave to come home now. Still, it would probably be 45 minutes before they got back. The knocking at the door finally stopped. I looked out the window and saw all of the men now running around to the back. This was not good. I moved towards the back of the house to try to see where the men were going. Within a minute, I heard the door knobs to one of the back doors rattling. They were trying to get inside now. That was followed by loud banging at the other back door that we had. I dialed 911 and tried to stay calm even though I was completely freaking out. The men stayed near the back of the house. Then things went quiet for probably 2 or 3 minutes. I thought that maybe the men had left but was too scared to look out of a window and see. But the silence was broken by more loud bangs, this time coming from a window. This was really bad because I didn't think the window would hold up and they would eventually break it. Probably 30 seconds after this, I heard the sound of a car pulling into our driveway. It had to be the police. The noises from the window suddenly stopped. I decided to look out the back window now. When I did, I saw all 3 men sprinting through our backyard. They were running to the back end of it, where we had a few trees and then there was a quiet road. Very quickly, they went out of sight. When I looked to the front and saw the police were there, I rushed out and told them about the men and that they were running away. Unfortunately, all of the men were pretty fast and were long gone by the time the police started looking for them. I'm not sure where they came from or where they went, but they were gone now. The police still looked around and asked me a few questions. Not long after that, my parents got home. I felt much better not being there alone anymore. After the police left, we stayed up late making sure that the guys didn't return, and luckily, they didn't. That was one of the scariest experiences I've ever had. This is a story that took place back when I was a kid. I was probably somewhere between the ages of 9. At that age, I loved Christmas mainly because of all the things that I would get. I lived with my parents, brother, and sister in a 2-story home in a typical neighborhood. Each year, we would do lots of decorating inside and outside of the house. Our Christmas tree would go in the corner of our living room, and all the presents would go underneath it. On Christmas Eve that year, we went to my grandparents' house and then we were going to my uncle's on Christmas. That night on Christmas Eve, after we all went to bed, I had a difficult time falling asleep. I usually did when I was a kid because I was always so excited for Christmas. I finally was able to doze off for a bit but woke up sometime later when it was still night. I remember just turning over to try to go back to sleep, but then I thought I heard a noise. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. My bedroom was the closest to the stairs, and even I could barely hear it. I looked at the clock, and it was 1 a.m. I didn't know why anybody would be up at this hour. Being that young and a curious kid, I decided to go and look. I left my bedroom and then walked a few feet to the railing of the stairs that overlooked the living room. I looked down, and everything seemed normal. All of the lights were off, but the lights from the Christmas tree and the few other decorations were on, so I could see a little bit. I looked down at the tree for a little while longer. It was very large, and we always got the biggest tree that we could find. But then I saw somebody come out from behind the tree. It wasn't my dad or brother, but a random guy that I didn't know. As soon as I realized that it was a random guy, I turned and ran. I went to the end of the hallway where my parents' bedroom was. I woke them up and told them that there was some guy in the house. I remember that my dad got up to look. He came back a short time later and said that he saw somebody leaving the house through the window. The police were called, and when they got out to our house, they searched all over our property. They didn't find the guy, but they did find that our window was broken. None of us had heard it break, so the guy must have quietly done it somehow. It was a living room window that was broken, and I think that I saw him not long after he got in the house because nothing was even stolen. I think that he either saw me or heard me, and that scared him off. I'm just really glad that he didn't try to come upstairs or anything. It still really freaked me out knowing that somebody broke in. It took me a long time to be able to fall back asleep, but eventually, I was able to. That was by far my craziest Christmas experience. Nothing like that has happened since, much less on Christmas. I still don't know who the guy was or why he chose our house. I also don't know if the police ever found him. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.